Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neera Tandon, and I am the president of the Center for American Progress. It is my privilege to welcome you all to CAP today for a critical discussion about how progressives should move forward in our fight for economic and racial justice. More than a half century ago, Dr. Martin Luther King led more than 200,000 marchers on the National Mall. We often remember that day as a plea for both civil rights and racial justice. But the event was actually billed as the March for Jobs and Freedom. What Dr. King and those marchers understood is that economic and racial justice are inextricably linked. And today, that fact remains true and as important as ever. Economic opportunity is the bedrock of equality, and our progress towards racial justice will depend on expanding opportunity in all spheres, from our classrooms and our courtrooms to our housing, our hospital, to our workplaces and our water mains. I know it doesn't often feel like that path forward is definite, but we definitely need to push it forward. We have made tremendous progress towards these goals over the last 8 years, thanks in large part to the strong progressive leadership of today's guest, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Julian Castro. Under Secretary Castro's leadership, HUD has expanded fair housing opportunities for millions of Americans. Thanks to his efforts, it is now harder than ever for a landlord or lender to discriminate against someone because of their race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And despite conservative opposition, Secretary Castro has spearheaded their department's new fair housing rule, which requires local governments that receive HUD funding to make a plan for reducing poverty and segregation in their communities. These efforts build on the unfinished work of the 1968 Fair Housing Act and expand opportunity for millions of families. CAP has been proud to be a partner with Secretary Castro in this critical work, and today we're releasing a new report on how a strong housing foundation is key to economic security. These issues have never been more important. The next administration has promised to restrict civil rights and tilt our nation's economy further towards the top 1%, and we must fight back. At its core, and under Secretary Castro's leadership, the Department of Housing and Urban Development has been the Department of ensuring opportunity for all Americans, and is up to all of us to ensure it continues to do that. We're incredibly honored to have Secretary Castro with us today. And as we approach MLK Day next week, we're ready to fight alongside him to defend Dr. King's legacy, protect progress, and continue our nation's enduring march for jobs and justice. So without further ado, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the 26th Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Julian Castro.
Good afternoon. Well, first of all, Neera, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and more importantly, thank you for your incredible leadership here at CAP and your powerful voice for folks who need it out there in the nation. Let's give Neera and CAP a big round of applause for their good work. I also want to thank Sarah Edelman and the entire team here at CAP. Where'd Sarah go? There she is. Thank you, Sarah, for the great work that you do. On more than one occasion, I've picked up the literature that CAP has put out and put it to good use. I hope that y'all feel there at HUD. In fact, I remember just a few months ago getting grilled in the middle of a congressional session and citing one of your reports. So just know that the things that y'all do here are put to good use for the people that need it out there. I also want to acknowledge all of our distinguished panelists who I know are going to share their insights in a few minutes for the difference that they're making in the lives of people across this country that all of us care about. And I want to give a shout out to several of my colleagues here at HUD. Let's give them, please, a round of applause for the work that they do to create more housing opportunity out there in the United States. As you can imagine, we're getting a little bit wistful these days. There's only a few days left in the administration. And over the last 2.5 years, I've had a front row seat to how diligent and passionate and effective HUD employees are. And getting to work with them has been really one of the privileges of my life, and so I really appreciate some of my colleagues being here. And finally, I want to thank each and every person in this room for joining this important conversation. I want you to know that I'm especially honored to join you in commemorating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose courage and commitment to the cause of social justice continues to inspire all of our work today. You know, this afternoon marks one of the last appearances that I'll make as HUD Secretary. And as this administration draws to a close, I've started reflecting on the extraordinary journey that I've had over the last 2.5 years. On April 16, 2014, I got a phone call from President Obama. He wanted to know if I'd be interested in taking on the role of Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. I remember the date because I don't know about you, but it's not every day that the President of the United States calls me and asks me if I want a job. I felt honored, of course, to be asked by the President, but it wasn't an easy decision for me. You see, at the time I was having a wonderful time serving my hometown of San Antonio. That community had been a huge part of the reason that I'd gotten into public service in the first place. I wanted to see others who'd grown up like I did, where I did, be blessed with the same opportunities in life that I'd been blessed with. To grow up with a family that loves you, to get a good education, to go to college, to become a professional, to reach one's dreams. And we were building that kind of community at the time. We just expanded high-quality full-day pre-K. We'd seen the number of dropouts plummet and high school graduates start to climb. More young folks were making the leap to higher education, and the city was finally creating more 21st century jobs. But then I started thinking about the incredible impact that HUD makes on the lives of more than 30 million Americans in every corner of our nation every year. I'd seen firsthand the difference that HUD made at the local level, and I couldn't turn down the chance to help HUD make that difference on a national scale. In my time as HUD Secretary, I've called HUD the Department of Opportunity because housing can serve as a powerful platform to spark greater progress in people's lives. Simply put, HUD is an indispensable partner in ensuring that folks of modest means have a fair shot at opportunity. And you can see the results of our work every day, everywhere. In Los Angeles, our Connect Home initiative has provided the family of 11-year-old Lisette Mattis with the opportunity to sign up for affordable internet access. Lisette can now do her homework on the family computer instead of having to use her parents' cell phone data or visit a neighbor's home. Connect Home has given Lisette and her two siblings an essential tool that they need to compete and succeed in today's 21st century global economy. In Chicago, we've given Christine McGee the support and training she needed to raise her annual income by $12,000. Now that she receives health insurance from her new job, she's been able to take her family off Medicaid. And she saved up more than $8,000 to move them out of HUD-assisted housing. And in Baltimore, we've helped eliminate a series of health hazards from the home of Dwayne Young. These improvements helped put an end to his severe asthma attacks. And instead of having to make frequent trips to the doctor's office, Dwayne was able to make his school's honor roll thanks to his perfect attendance record. Dwayne's story proves that a good home can lay the foundation for our health, our happiness, and our future success. And today, I'm proud to announce that HUD is joining forces with the CDC and the EPA to launch a series of new steps that will protect more children and families in HUD-assisted housing from the dangers of lead. I'm confident that in the years ahead, HUD will keep working to ensure that every child in America has the chance to grow up in a safe and a healthy home. And that's just one of the many reasons why HUD truly is the Department of Opportunity. We maintain a strong and supportive safety net for many of the most vulnerable in our country, from elderly and disabled Americans to those experiencing homelessness. We also offer affordable housing to millions of working-class families, folks who are doing their best to put food on the table while still paying the bills. And through the efforts of FHA, we're providing nearly 8 million hardworking and responsible Americans with the chance to secure a gateway to the middle class. In fact, over the past 2.5 years, it's been my profound honor to help advance the mission of HUD. I'm also convinced that as we take stock of everything that's been accomplished over these last 8 years, we can see clear steps that should be taken in the coming years to continue sparking economic and housing opportunity for folks of modest means. The first is that we need to keep up strong fair housing efforts. Yes, it's true that we've made a lot of progress when it comes to fair housing over the generations, but the playing field of housing opportunity is not level yet in America. When a person of color or someone who is disabled or gay goes into the housing market, he or she is less likely to be shown available units in the rental market, less likely to find a willing seller in the purchase market. And worse yet, millions of Americans continue to suffer from the legacy of segregation. A little more than a year after I became secretary, I traveled to Ferguson, Missouri, where I heard a sobering fact that I'll never forget. I learned that a child born in the Jeff Vanderloo neighborhood of St. Louis can expect to live up to 18 years less than a child born in the community of Clayton that's less than 10 miles away. That's a situation that we simply can't accept. Not in this country, not in the United States of America. Too many of our nation's children continue to see their future limited by the zip code where they grow up. And as they come of age, as they recognize the barriers to opportunity that exist all around them, they're forced to ask themselves a heartbreaking question. Why don't I deserve a fair shot at achieving my dreams? Addressing this profound inequality remains one of the pressing challenges of our time. So last year, HUD introduced a historic fair housing rule, affirmatively furthering fair housing, or AFFH. It's designed to knock down undue obstacles that prevent all Americans from moving their families into communities that offer them good schools, safe streets, and reliable transit. Our AFFH rule can serve as an indispensable first step in making sure that every child in America can grow up in a neighborhood of promise. And we can't afford to go back on the progress that we've made in providing that basic opportunity to all of our nation's children. Second, the American dream of homeownership is as alive today as it ever has been. And we have to continue to work to strengthen that dream. In one of my first speeches as secretary in 2014, I set out the case for ending the stigma of promoting responsible homeownership in America. And a few months later, I joined President Obama in Phoenix to announce that the FHA was reducing its mortgage insurance fees. Since then, HUD has helped an additional 1.4 million borrowers to become homeowners. And just this morning, we announced another premium reduction, one that will help more than 1 million borrowers save an average of $500 on their mortgage payments over the course of the upcoming year. Today, the homeownership rate is at one of its lowest levels in 5 decades. So we should continue to take reasonable steps to ensure that more hardworking, responsible borrowers can buy a home. I believe now, as I said back then, that we can achieve a strong balance between keeping important reforms in place, safeguards we developed after the housing crisis, and opening up the credit box to more Americans. Third, our nation needs to robustly address the affordable housing crisis that's happening all over our country. Today, nearly 8 million low-income households pay more than half of their incomes on rent. And these are folks who don't currently receive any housing assistance from the federal government. So it's clear we need to use every tool at our disposal to to build up our supply of affordable rental housing and stem this crisis for hardworking American families. We need to expand the availability of the low-income housing tax credit that has been a tremendous tool in affordable housing development. Congress should increase the number of housing choice vouchers, and we need to urge local communities across the nation to introduce smart land use regulations that make the development of affordable housing less expensive. Fourth, and finally, we got to build on the tremendous success of opening doors. The President laid out a vision for setting America on the path toward ending homelessness. Opening doors represents the best of what can happen when folks in D.C. join forces with leaders at the local level. The President set that bold vision in 2010. Congress invested the resources we needed to expand our HUD-VASH vouchers. And after the First Lady issued the Mayor's Challenge to End Veteran Homelessness, communities around the nation answered the call. Thanks to their hard work, together we've reduced veteran homelessness in the United States by nearly 47%. And we've learned valuable lessons about the tools and strategies our nation can use to provide every American with a safe and stable place to call home. Now, I know that many of the folks in this room are concerned about what the future may hold. You're wondering if the progress we've achieved over the last 8 years is about to be undone. The good news is that part of the answer to that question depends on you. As President Obama has reminded us many times, it is we the people who hold the greatest power to make change. We have the power to create the political will necessary to ensure that America works for everyone, including the poor and the disenfranchised. As Secretary, I visited 100 communities in 39 states across this nation. Places big and small, urban, rural, and tribal. I've sat down with folks of just about every background and every skin color. And my experiences have convinced me that the values which unite us as Americans are far stronger than the differences that pull us apart. After all, it's true that folks generally want the same things in life: to be able to provide for their family, to make sure their kids get a good education, to save up enough for a decent retirement in their golden years. They also still believe in America as a place of possibility. They believe that if they're given a fair shot to succeed and if they work hard, that they can earn a better life for themselves and for their families. As advocates, as educators and researchers, as volunteers or public servants, each of us has a role to play in making that promise of America real, and in sustaining the incredible momentum that has been built up for serving the folks in this country who need it most. I hope that in the coming days you will resolve to fight harder than ever before for vulnerable communities, that in the years to come they shall be respected, invested in, and find equal justice under the law. I also hope that as we hand the baton of governance to a new administration, that you will reflect on why you got into this work in the first place. Because you care. Because you want to make other people's lives better. And because your work can help create a brighter future for our entire nation and world. A future in which our nation can live up to its greatest promise, a promise embodied by Dr. King and his work. To be one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Keep fighting the good fight. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Secretary Castro and to all of his team that just departed. But as all of you know here, HUD has been one of the hardest working agencies over the past 8 years. When the Obama administration came in, they had a housing crisis that landed right on their lap. And without the hard work of HUD, many more of us would have had family members who, were foreclosed on. So great leadership at HUD, great leadership by Secretary Castro, and we really thank him for his remarks. I am thrilled to have a great panel here to continue the conversation about how we build a nation where all families are valued and have an equal shot. And so I'm just going to go ahead and first introduce the panel, and then we'll jump right in. First, we have Lisa Mensah, the Undersecretary. So Lisa Mensah is the current Undersecretary of the USDA for Rural Development and has helped lead the department's rural economic development efforts. She's played a major role in USDA's continued efforts in promoting rural development through supporting rural housing, infrastructure projects, and small business. Prior to joining USDA, she was the founding director of the Initiative on Financial Security at the Aspen Institute and worked at the Ford Foundation, where she was responsible for the country's largest philanthropic grant portfolio of investments for rural America. Thank you for being here with us today. Next, we have Rabbi Jonah Pesner, who is the director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. He also serves as the Senior Vice President of the Union for Reform Judaism. In these capacities, Rabbi Pesner has led interfaith efforts for social justice that have reached across lines of race, class, and faith. Prior to his leadership of the RAC, Rabbi Pesner served as the founding director of Just Congregations, which impacts more than 260 communities in 32 states and engages countless clergy, professional, and volunteers in campaigns promoting various economic and social justice issues. We also have Tafari Gabray, the Executive Vice President of the AFL-CIO, the National Federation of Labor Unions, which represents over 12.5 million workers. Tafari emigrated to the United States from Ethiopia as a teenager. During college, he got his first union job as a night shift loader at UPS, and ever since has dedicated his career to hard work and workers' voice in the workplace. In 2013, Tafari was elected to serve as his current executive position with the AFL. Tafari has called himself the quadruple threat in Trump's America. He's black, a refugee, an immigrant, and a labor leader.
Right now.
And finally, we have a youth activist who has had some transit issues. Hopefully she'll join us a little bit later, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce her. Michaela Gilliam Price. She's an 18-year-old organizer from Baltimore, Maryland. Her work began drawing attention in the aftermath of Freddie Gray's death. She co-founded an organization called City Block her junior year of high school to bring together student activists to make their voices heard in Baltimore. In 2015, she received a Certificate of Accomplishment from Princeton University for her work on race relations. She was also named one of Baltimore City Paper's Best of Baltimore and was one of the Baltimore Sun's 25 Women to Watch in 2016. She graduated from high school in June and has been accepted to the new school. So we'll hope that Michaela can join us a little bit later. So Tafari, we're going to start with you. We live in a time where the economy is tilting further and further toward the 1%. We're bracing for possibly the gravest fight we've had in decades on workers' rights and worker power, as well as attacks on immigrants and refugees. I'd like you to speak to what's at risk and how we fight back. How do we unite the fight for economic and social justice, stem the erosion of the middle class, and create jobs that allow workers to build a middle class life? So no, not a big question at all, just an easy one, softball.
First, thank you for having me here. And we need to have more of this, conspiracy sessions. I don't know about you, I'm done with meetings. I want to conspire because that's what the other side does. It's not new. It has been for decades. The playing field has been tilted against people who get up in the morning and go to work. The lobbying class and the elite in this country has sort of gumbled away what made this country great. When I was a child, I used to dream of this place called America. And that dream was based just basically if you work hard, if you apply yourself, there is no place on earth than America that you can actually become what you want to be. And that's what I pursued and walked through a desert to come into this country. And from, that American promise has worked for me. I'm a product of everything public. I have lived in public housing. I went to public education, high school high school through college, and I know how valuable government is when government works, when society works, and when that promise of America works. But none of this that where we're at, the 99% versus the 1%, or the erosion of trust in American government, it didn't happen by accident. It didn't happen because it just happened. It happened because people worked on it. People designed it to be to be that way. So look, nothing great in this country happened without a crisis. And I will say right now, especially for the progressive movement, we are at the pinnacle of all crisis. Because we have a president-elect who is nominating someone who doesn't believe in public education to be Secretary of Education. Someone who is owner and the CEO of a public, a fast food chain, with half of his businesses under investigation for wage theft, to be a watchdog for workers and the Department of Labor. So we are in crisis. So what I like to do, and one of my favorite things, is I go back and look at the Chinese symbol for crisis. It's two symbols. The first one is danger. The other one is opportunity. Neither one of them come without crisis. So we are in crisis. So the question for the progressive movement and for all of us is, which road do we take? Do we take this an opportunity to actually restore America to what it needs to be? Or do we double down on the danger side and lose the America that I dreamed about, the America that I risked my life to come and live in? I don't know about everybody else. I'm going to choose the opportunity side. I'm going to choose to be on the streets. I'm going to choose to resist. I'm going to choose to fight back, because there is nothing left to fight for if we don't fight right now.
Thank you. Rabbi Pesner, following up and sort of talking about this, trying to take the path of opportunity. Just over 50 years ago, Rabbi Joshua Abram Heschel walked alongside Dr. King in Selma for civil rights. He said that he was praying with his feet. Dr. King's work ushered in a set of civil rights and economic protections to help create a more just America. Yet, as you have written, the wide-reaching impact of racial and economic justice in the nation is still an emergency. With so much work for economic and racial justice yet unfinished, how should we be praying with our feet in the current political environment?
Well, first of all, let me just say amen. And thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the Center for American Progress for convening this conversation. So let us conspire. I think that was a beautiful way to start, because people forget, as a great community organizer once taught me, conspire just means to pray with and to breathe with, right? Con is with and spire is breath. So let's breathe a little bit together, and let's live together, and let's breathe new life into the soul of America. Because when we're out there marching in the streets and when we're resisting the policies that are reprehensible to our abiding moral values, we will need to stay grounded in our collective faith and our collective life, which is, I think, the lesson of Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel and the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of courageous organizers who led this country 50 years ago. We're now back to that place where we're going to need to do that again. So it's good to ground ourselves. Dr. King was right. The arc of history bends towards justice, but as the president said recently, it kind of zigs and zags sometimes. So we're zigging. Now we need to help it zag. Among the greatest victories of the marches and the organizing of the Civil Rights Movement was the Voting Rights Act. of 1965, which is real personal for us in the Reformed Jewish movement that I lead, because it was drafted in part in our conference room as we hosted the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights. Another lesser known fact of civil rights history is that it was a Reformed Jewish institution that was the host and convener of Dr. King and the other leaders of the movement. And so it was personal for us in 2012 when the Supreme Court eviscerated the Voting Rights Act and eliminated preclearance. And we just witnessed the first presidential election since the passage of the Voting Rights Act that didn't have the Voting Rights Act protections. And what happened? The untold story of this campaign is the millions of votes that were never cast because of voter suppression laws that were passed in many states, not the least of which was in North Carolina, that the appellate court threw out using a phrase that will never get out of my head, which is, it was racist with surgical precision. 2016 America, and there are folks passing laws on a state level to suppress the vote that are racist with surgical precision, which means that racism is alive and well in our country, and voting rights and access seems to have become a partisan issue. If there's one thing that ought to unite all Americans, is that every American has the right to vote and should be encouraged to vote. When you then add in the problem of the new Jim Crow and mass incarceration, and you acknowledge that I, as a white man, have only a 1 in 17 chance of going to prison, but as a black man would have a 1 in 3 chance, and that we have 2.1 million incarcerated in America, many of whom will come out and not have the ability to vote or get a job, we see the intersectionality between economic oppression and racism. And voting access is kind of the epicenter of it because we lose our power to make a change. So with this, because I know we're going to continue the conversation, but one last thing. We mobilized thousands of Reformed Jews to North Carolina at the invitation this summer of Reverend William Barber. He invited us down there, head of Moral Mondays and NAACP, to do voter registration and election protection work. And I told the story about the Voting Rights Act and why it was personal to us. And he got up at the microphone and always speak before Reverend Barber. Never follow Reverend Barber.
Good advice.
And Reverend Barber said, "Rabbi, I want to issue a Talmudic correction, an emendation." He said the Voting Rights Act was not written in Washington. It was written in blood in Selma. And it was transcribed in your conference room in Washington. So let's take a breath, let's conspire, and let's remember the risk and the blood that was shed to win these gains, and the risk and the courage and the work it's going to take for us to organize and win them back.
Well said.
Undersecretary Bensa, many progressives have failed to keep an eye on and help address the urgent challenges of communities left behind by our economy and those that are experiencing decline as other regions grow economically stronger. These left behind communities include dozens of cities, small towns, and rural areas. Could you speak to some of the challenges facing the small towns and rural areas? Help us understand what's happening, the work you and your team have been doing to address the challenges, and how we pave the way forward to create more economic opportunity for all.
Thanks, Sarah. With gladness, I will speak with that topic. And it's wonderful to be back at CAP and on this panel. And my word is, if CAP invites you to do something, do it. Because we're all in for a treat. And I appreciated the words of Secretary Castro, too. Sarah, you mentioned, who are we leaving behind? What communities are we leaving behind? And I've been talking about the unfinished work of America, which I think Dr. King always reminds us, he didn't make it to the mountaintop with all of us in flesh, but that we would get there, and we had to keep going on this journey together. And so I think there is much unfinished work in our economic challenges, and you've put it in the title of this event on jobs and justice. I'm going to take inspiration from this event. I'm going to choose opportunity. I'm going to breathe and pray with my feet. But I think the unfinished work of the communities we've left behind is much about the way we build and the way we maintain. And I have had the privilege for the last 2 years of serving in this administration and being responsible for rural America. I think we must have crisscrossed, Secretary Castro and I made it to 37 states in 2 years. And what a privilege. And what I saw is what powerful work has been done through this federal government. What a powerful agency I have the privilege to help lead. And what is surprising to me is how far along it already is. You know, I'm holding here our progress report, and I brought a few copies because I want people to understand what we already have, what a treasure we already have in our government, in the way our appropriations work. We have already built and maintained a powerful amount of housing in this country. It was Roosevelt's job to take the tour. It was Johnson's job to take the tour in rural America and say, unacceptable. We must have greater rental housing. We must have a way that single-family housing is safe and sanitary. And through, at the same time as we were passing other pieces of the social insurance network, we were investing in ourselves in a very American way, in a way that rewarded the private sector and rewarded hard work. There's nothing handout about our system. And right now, I'm in an agency that in just the Obama era spent over $250 billion building infrastructure, improving, putting in water systems, putting in the housing systems, letting people make sure they could afford their rental homes in concert with the private sector. And the powerful thing is, it already works. We don't have to invent this. We do have to protect it. We have to ask Congress to do their job and keep these funds flowing. But I think what's such an honor for me to serve in government for the first time is to see what's already here. This is a tremendous backdrop. The reason, and I too share an African heritage, the reason so many people are called to come to this country is to get a start, often with the intention of helping those back home. But the reason it works so well here is everything we've done to invest. So I have a great sense of our need to protect the investments that we've made and to keep building. It isn't that hard. This is the right use for our treasure. You know, the simple dignity of a home is one we ought to continue to champion. It just makes so much sense. It's an economic stimulus. It's the thing that anchors life, and that's what so much of the fight is for. So I am proud to count myself among the builders, among the developers of our communities. Our rural areas are going to be fine. There is so much strength in them, and I hope we'll get to that. But we can't step back from the work that we know builds them. And so that's what I wanted to give a sense today. And we know what to do. We know how to do it. The channels are there. We just need to be serious about continuing this fight.
Thank you. So sticking with housing for a moment, you know, as we described in the report that we released today, affordable housing is a key component to any family's economic foundation, yet it's harder than ever for anyone who isn't wealthy to buy a home, and it's even more expensive to rent in many parts of the country. So I'd love to you talked a little bit about it, at least in your remarks now, but could you speak a little bit more to how housing stability can make or break a family's financial stability?
I love working on the housing issues, and in rural development, many people don't know that we have a partnership with HUD, but we responsibly care for the nation's rural housing through the Department of Agriculture, through the many offices in the many states and counties where we have. Yes, housing does anchor families, and the wonderful thing is, in rural America, it's still affordable. So many families have gotten their start. Folks would be surprised to learn that we still write mortgages through the Department of Agriculture directly. We have a direct mortgage program that's over $1 billion of mortgages were issued this year. When a family gets that first home, and some of them build them themselves, we have a self-help program. It is the absolute unlocking, not only of financial stability, but of stability for life. And it allows you to be a serious worker. We know this. So I think it is why housing has always had a place and needs this place in our economic livelihood. We know we can't do it all. Production agriculture can be fine, but its workers and the rest of rural life needs a place to call home. I love what the Secretary mentioned today about the progress this administration has made on homelessness. both for veterans, for people coming out of incarceration, all the first starts, the first ramps. But it's also unquestionable that it's not just about ownership, but about affordable renting. And it looks a little more affordable in many rural areas. I just think, again, this is not that hard. This is one of those areas where we don't have to keep recreating the wheel. We know what to do. We know how much it costs. We have partners in the private sector who desperately want to build with us. We now know that our banking system is very related to how strong our housing system can be. So nothing needs to be thrown overboard. We've got the right anchors. We need to be serious about doing this and about calling to account this is a country that can and should house our citizens, and our markets are ready to do that with us. So I'm glad you put housing in the thrust of an event focused on jobs and justice, because I think it is one of those anchors. It's not the flashiest thing, but for most people, it will be your largest expense, and it is the thing that anchors and allows you to get the rest of life, the savings for retirement or for life moving forward when you've got that core need covered.
Thanks. So I'm going to step out of my moderator role for just a minute. We've got later this week, we will be beginning confirmation hearings for Dr. Ben Carson to act as HUD Secretary. And I'm not directing this question to you, Lisa. But I'm incredibly concerned about the choice of somebody who has said that poverty is a choice and who has opposed many of the fair housing gains that Secretary Castro's administration at HUD has moved forward. I'm curious. I know that neither Rabbi Pesner, although you do some affordable housing work, or Tafari, housing isn't the place what you think about all day. But do you share my concern?
Well, yes. A couple of things. There are significant questions about all of the nominees, and we're, as a faith-based movement, trying to respectfully and in a nonpartisan way ask hard questions about many of the nominees who seem to be coming out of opposite land, where they are skeptical of the institutions they're being asked to lead. So that's a baseline. When it comes to housing, I want to echo and affirm, I think, what Undersecretary Mensah said and the premise of your question, which is, does the government have a role to play in the fostering of a market that will make sure people have homes? And the answer is yes, and it's not new. This is not like suddenly some epiphany that we're having. It's like as far back as the American experience. And the free market has a role to play too, clearly, and the public-private partnership matters. The faith-based movement actually has a role to play. I can point to communities on the ground where it was the faith community coming together across lines, both lines of Jewish, Christian, Muslim, but also class differences, because in many cases, faith is the one thing that people will have in common when they live in different neighborhoods, have different racial or ethnic backgrounds, and generally have different socioeconomic backgrounds. They can come together and overcome NIMBYism by collectively working with the market forces, whether it's lenders or developers and government agencies, to try and get housing actually built in neighborhoods. And so I would, especially in a moment in time when we're not going to be seeing likely visionary leadership from Washington on this issue, that it's urgent that we challenge our local communities to come together and to organize. And if Dr. King taught us anything, it is that the civil rights movement is a religious movement. The churches of this country, along with synagogues, mosques, and all other kind of faith-based meeting institutions, are going to have to step up and double down their commitment to the common good. And that's going to have ramifications for affordable housing construction, but it's going to also have all kinds of other ramifications as well.
Sticking with you for just one moment on this idea of really getting folks out to help. I mean, I think that it's, sometimes it's easier for someone to get on a plane and fly across the country to participate in a march than it is for them to show up on an everyday basis and, be sort of arm to arm with folks in their community fighting for living wages, or some of the other important economic and civil rights issues. Could you speak a little bit to what you found in your career, some effective strategies you found for really engaging people where they are?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And when you reference the 260 communities across the United States, those are the communities where we as the Jewish people engaged with the broader community, Christian and Muslim communities, with our partner networks like the PICO organization or the Industrial Areas Foundation, founded by the boogeyman Saul Alinsky, right? Because classic community organizing actually works, right? So if you bring people together across lines, then they can kind of collectively help government officials rise above their kind of partisan problems or challenges and invite the corporate sector in a way to really be an engine for the common good. I'll give you the example I think we were chatting about earlier, which is building a coalition of certified nursing assistants, largely Haitian, in a community in Massachusetts, underpaid, overworked, disrespected, by building a coalition between them and through the churches and the synagogues with the residents of the facilities and the institutions that they were caring for frail elders, and the children of those residents, and then the neighbors who lived in the neighborhoods around those. By bringing those stakeholders together, we could then bring enough pressure on the nursing home owners, the assisted living facility directors. We could go to the press and tell stories. We could get the Civil Rights Division of the Attorney General's office to actually pay attention to the way that the workers were being treated because, of course, no surprise, the way the workers are treated impacts the way that the residents are actually cared for. I think in this environment where so much federal policy is going to be under assault, we're going to need to really build this from the bottom up. And by the way, that will also build a base of social change for the long run as well, as we look to, what will restore the Voting Rights Act? Well, if we really do build broad-based interfaith networks on the ground, then we can reclaim some of the longer-term policy challenges that we have.
And Tafari, your experience when you were in Southern California and you were running, it was bigger than a local. I'm getting the I'm losing the name of the post, but you doubled the political capacity of the union you were leading. You've also said that while many others are heading out of the South, you want to be heading to the South, where worker protections are weakest, to be building a movement for living wages and for worker voice. Tell us a little bit about how you grow a worker voice movement, and why you've decided to try and focus on the South when others are focusing elsewhere.
Because I don't think it's that hard in the South, and I don't know how many people are. Before this job, I came from Orange County, California. Otherwise, what was known as the Orange Curtain. And if you're a progressive, you're not supposed to step foot into that place. Every bad idea in this country originated from Orange County, California. The National Taxpayers Association just started from Costa Mesa Taxpayers Association. Just everything bad comes from, the voucher system. Everything bad comes out of that place. And I know you all know about the Real Housewives of Orange County. That's what we know about Orange County. It is one of the wealthiest places on the face of the earth. But it's not a small place. Orange County has almost 4 million people who live in it. It's the fourth largest county in the country. So what I saw in a great state of California, and when we were trying to build up the labor movement and the progressive movement in California, Orange County, we used to call it the drive-over county. Progressive would do stuff in Los Angeles. They drive on the 5 freeway over Orange County to go do stuff in San Diego and ignore 4 million people in there. So when I went to organize in Orange County, what I found was for every one of those housewives you see who nobody knows what they do all day long other than sip a martini next to the pool, for every one of them, there was a bus driver who drove their kids to school. There was someone who's cleaning that pool. There was someone who was cooking for them. So we decided, working actually with 50 different churches in Orange County, we decided that we are going to work with those people that nobody is paying attention to. So I could give you a long litany of this, but we decided to organize for the long term. Not this election and not the next election, but we're going to stay in. We instituted a year-round voter registration program. Did not take a day off. Every day we had canvassers going and registering voters. So in 2006, when I got into Orange County, a Republican registration advantage of 29%. And let me finish with this. This past election, we started in 2006. This past election, for the first time since FDR, Orange County voted for Hillary Clinton for president. For the first time. We ate up 29% of registration advantage. But that wasn't the only thing we were doing. But we were investing in people who needed an investment in. We were working with people to fight their own fight instead of trying to be their agents and try to fight them for try to fight their fight for them. So, for example, in places like in Anaheim, California, we just didn't want to change the law. We wanted to change the system. We changed the way the elections are done. And instead of citywide elections, district level elections. In this past election, progressives for the first time in 200 years took over the largest city in Orange County. And affordable housing, by the way, is on the front of that fight. And these people elected campaigning on those issues. But as a trade unionist, let me just finish with this. I know this from the bottom of my heart. If you want to close the gap between the haves and have-nots in this country, if you want to close the gap for those who are struggling to afford an apartment versus those who keep on building mansions, there isn't a single other panacea for equality in this country other than collective bargaining. And the entire progressive movement has put collective bargaining in a back burner. And unless we restore workers' rights to negotiate, to sit across the table from their employers and demand what's rightfully theirs, we will be fighting this fight is over and over and over again unless we empower workers, people who get up in the morning and go to work every day, immigrants and everybody else to actually do their own fights.
Thank you. There are a number of terrifying threats coming down the pike for immigrants in this country, and we haven't spent a ton of time on this panel talking about it. But one aspect I'd like to talk about is, we don't spend a lot of time talking about the impact to the economy when you hold immigrants down. And when you do any of the things that President-elect Trump has said he wants to do to immigrant families, could you speak a little bit to the role of immigrants in our economy and in the housing market, both Tafari and Undersecretary Mensah? I know that we tend not to think about immigrants in rural America, but I know they play a pretty big role as well. We'll start with you, Lisa.
Of course. Well, as the favorite line from Hamilton goes, immigrants get the job done. So, it's such this is the core of how this country came along. I always want to give a shout out to the original native communities, because we didn't have to go in this way, but we did. We basically have been an immigrant country, and rural America has been an immigrant place. I spoke with Chuck Flaherty, one of our most thoughtful researchers on rural America, and I said, Chuck, you've been giving me a new vision of rural America because it's browner and more diverse than we might expect. And he said, but Lisa, it's always been that way. Maybe not browner, but it was always the immigrant story. There was always the new group in rural America. There was always the group that was struggling for place. But the truth is, as we as Americans have offered and have brought immigrants in or allowed them to fight for their place. This wasn't always easy. It isn't even always easy in our current generations. We've become stronger. So not only do immigrants get the job done, immigrants make America bolder, stronger, and their ability to thrive makes us more able to thrive. And I think that the parts of rural America that are growing, that are offering more, have figured out how to make this diverse immigrant population work. So I just admire the expert we have here in the many jobs that are available. Imagine, though, that our rural areas, just as our urban areas, are home to great numbers of immigrant populations who have been the vanguard of the workforce, whether it's from direct work with agro-processing, agribusiness, farming, or the next step up as we do bioeconomies and the future. This is our American story, and I think it's why we recoil at any notion that it isn't our American story. Many were unwilling immigrants. That is the story of African Americans in this country, but we're here. And, I just keep saying, I believe it to my core that it is the great diversity of this, that when we figure out how to allow everybody in, that's what makes this boat go faster and further forward. So I think rural America is part of that too.
I know I'm at CAP, so I do this maybe at risk.
I don't know where you're going to go with this.
I think the greatest failure of the progressive movement has been in how we respond to immigrants. We count on immigrants at the ballot box to save the progressive movement. Meanwhile, under a progressive administration, 3 million immigrants got deported. Hear me now. Here is the argument straight up I get from people is, these people broke the law. They came to this country without papers. Of course, they have to be deported. As voters, as taxpayers in this country, if we believe we live in a democracy, we have to be responsible for our democracy. I took a delegation to Honduras when flood of children were coming in here. If you get a chance, go to Central American countries and talk to people there, how frightened they are. And the direct relationship of progressive ideas of free trade and the Central American Free Trade Agreement and the causal relationship it has in terrifying people and making it impossible to live in their own countries. And when they come here, we throw tomatoes and rocks at little kids in buses. That's not America. That's not America. When we had 60 senators in 2009, it's not the right who failed. It's the progressives who failed to correct our broken immigration system. And if we get a chance again to actually be in a position of power, we have some things that we have to do if we're going to count on the emerging majority in this country. We have to restore our voting rights. We have to restore the dignity of immigrants in this country. When we do that, from states from Arizona down, even rural areas where immigrants live, immigrants actually can have a confidence when they vote for progressives, progressives will deliver for them. Because right now, a lot of immigrants are in limbo. And the only advice I'll give you from being an immigrant myself and under this administration feeling like I have to be stepping in a weight and measured how American I am, which is the scariest thought you could have in this country. Don't tell immigrants or people like me or people of color, we have a system of checks and balances which is actually going to protect you. We're frightened. We're scared. We're really, really scared. And what we need is a hug, not just people to tell us, don't worry about it.
May I add a reflection?
Yeah, I was going to go to you. I think in addition to reflecting on building for the long term and not just when it's convenient, when there's an election, I would also love you to touch on how Jews, Christians, and other people of faith can be there to stand up for our Muslim brothers and sisters.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Sarah, to give the opportunity, because the one kind of agitational part of what I heard, well, that was all very agitational, but a piece of it that was agitational was, if we get power back, we have power. Church by church, synagogue by synagogue, mosque by mosque, precinct by precinct, to open our sanctuary congregations and to be what religious institutions were founded to be, which were places of refuge and beacons of light to the world. So we're seeing an unprecedented number of religious institutions asking the question, how can we help? Train us in becoming sanctuary congregations. How will we resist? Will there be mass deportations? We saw Jews and Christians by the tens of thousands sign online commitments to register as Muslims if there's some kind of Muslim registry. So I think where we have immediate power is for local congregations and communities to come together in resistance to all of this anti-immigrant bigotry, to the anti-Muslim bigotry, and to model the kind of civility and dignity that we want for the rest of the country. As a longer-term base-building strategy, that then becomes an entity of power that can actually restore voting rights, that can challenge the criminal injustice system that we have, and some other significant issues. The other thing that I will say, because we've acknowledged the many ways in which the election resulted in an administration and a Congress that is going to be extremely problematic for many of the policies and the issues we care about. That's a given. But the nature of the election, which is unique in my lifetime, it also unleashed this kind of bigotry and the hate, right? That it would be permissible to demonize Mexican Americans or to mock people with disabilities or to allow misogyny to go unanswered and sexual assault to be kind of laughed at. I want to acknowledge as a Jew and a rabbi that there were 24 million anti-Semitic tweets, anti-Jewish tweets, that were made 10 billion impressions over the last year. So we are now all in this together. And it was incredible to me that the front page of the New York Times had a story about how many synagogues and mosques have suddenly come together in deep partnerships to protect one another and stand against hate. So crisis breeds opportunity. This is the opportunity. Let's be the America that we believe in.
Thank you. One more question before I kick it to the audience for Q&A. Tomorrow, the Senate will begin confirmation hearings for Senator Sessions. Mr. Sessions has a serious track record of racism. He's called the Civil Rights Act a piece of intrusive legislation. He was too racist for a bipartisan Senate panel to confirm for a judgeship back in the 80s. Yet here we are. This week considering whether to give him one of the most powerful positions in the government. Senator Sherrod Brown announced on Friday that he won't support Sessions. He said that now more than ever we need leaders who can bring Americans together to improve police-community relations, ensure that all Americans have access to the ballot, and to reform our criminal justice system. However, there are other Democratic senators who appear to be on the fence and many Republican senators planning to support him. Rabbi Pesner or Tafari Gabray, do you have any message for these senators?
Yes, I expect them, especially Democrats, and not only Democrats, but senators from some southwestern states, Republicans. If this is the time, actually, we should be really thinking about accountability more than any other time. More than any other time. This person is not qualified to be the top cop in this country. Myself, as an immigrant and as a black man, do not trust Jeff Sessions to fight for my rights as an attorney general. There is a rumor that they might confirm him on a voice vote. On a voice vote. That means he is really the most qualified person to actually take this job. Now, I want you to imagine if it was the other way around. If it was the other way around. Because we had 59 senators instead of 60 because Ted Kennedy was sick. We were told we can't get anything done. But now all of a sudden, with 52 senators on the other side, it looks like some people are raising their hands and say, we have no control over it. They own this country. They own this country, and we have to let this happen. So we will be in the states. We're working with the NAACP and with other organizations to actually get involved in civil disobedience. Next Friday we'll be in Iowa and in senators senators' offices, and we'll be doing stand-ups and sit downs with clergy and civil rights organizations and labor. And we expect our leaders in the House and in the Senate to back us up and to fight with every opportunity they have. There are 30 hours of, I think, debates that are supposed to be there. We want to use every minute of those times. Even if he gets confirmed, he's exposed actually for what he is and what the job he is applying to entails. So this is serious. I think the problem is it's not only him. You have a box full of nominees that we have to fight. So they're going to test us. They're going to test us actually on which ones we're going to unite, which ones we're going to divide. And if we live with the mantra of an injury to one is an injury to all, and I take anybody's fight as my own fight, we still have the power actually to affect change in this country.
Rabbi Pesner, anything to add?
Just that, our partner and kind of soulmate in this work, Cornell Brooks, who's the president of the NAACP, was arrested just this week. We are deeply concerned about this appointment, and with all the concern about all the appointments, this one rises to the top, given the assault on voting rights in this country. And just the only thing I would add is process really matters. There's huge gaps in the record that we want to see and be seen. And we want to make sure that these hearings, we believe in the hearings. We are holding out judgment until the hearings happen because democracy and process matters. Let's have robust hearings. He should be called to account for the things that he's done and has said in his record. And then let's have a real vote and let's have an honest conversation in this country about what civil rights and voting access looks like.
Thank you. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Raise your hand if you want the mic. Right there in the blue.
Ken Lemberg. I'm affiliated with a bunch of different progressive groups. Beyond the obvious that we've talked about, which has included disparagement of government, voter suppression, in terms of what we can learn going forward and not just going backward, why was it that so many people felt disenfranchised in the country, particularly in the rural areas, South, Midwest? Why did they feel that way and feel that they didn't see a lot of what government, the good things it has been doing?
Sarah, I'll start with that. I don't have a psychological analysis, but I can tell you it's a hard thing to get through with positive news. I've spent the last 2 years almost every day saying something that we've done well in this administration, and I get the glorious jobs, mostly with Republicans, standing around as we put in a water system or a new housing system, or we say this community would go down but for this federal money. And most often it's a loan. It's something a community is coming together and paying back and is taxing themselves at $60 more a month so that a water system can go in. I get tiny coverage in a little local newspaper, maybe a local person that is, picks it up. Occasionally, Spanish language news will cover it, there's something hard. The it bleeds, it leads character of our current national discussion does make it hard. I can tell you when you get a human touch with someone, people whispered to me that they voted for the president that I represented, They said thank you. They were desperate for the things that we have changed and done. They were thankful that housing opportunities after housing opportunities were saved or built, that the very senior centers that you mentioned or the schools that you mentioned were put in by federal dollars, long awaited, long fought for. I can tell you it is hard to shout that message. We've got to do a better job of it. Somehow we've lost hold of how this all works. So I got the happy job of doing this and of being with rural Americans who understood at that moment that we were standing in a building that government funds enabled. Even if it took 6 different kinds of money, the federal money was the last and the most important. But I can tell you it's a hard thing to break through. I don't know why that is. Please, may somebody help us do this. Maybe it's the next generation that has to help us say this story well. It's our treasure. It's our government. And I feel like if we can't say what is worth it, there is a fight. And then we have to run it. And I don't know the answer to how to get it more. But I can tell you that the $250 billion that the Obama administration invested in rural housing and jobs and infrastructure was well spent and well appreciated and partnered and well administrated. And I don't know how to get that out any louder, but it will do, and it will continue to do good work, and it will transform lives in rural America. And I have to hope that at some point that will get through, but it's hard.
Thank you, and thanks for the question. I'm going to conclude with a prayer that was shared by Valerie Kaur at a vigil on New Year's Eve, hosted by Dr. Reverend Barber. Part of it said, the sick prayer, my faith dares me to ask, what if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if the story of America is one long labor? I wanted to thank the three of you for being up here and for sharing your wisdom and your insights with our audience and the folks on the webcast. I think indeed it is, we have a choice here, and we don't know yet whether it's the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb. I think it really depends on what we all do moving forward and the kind of movement that we build across, across labor and housing. We can't fight in our silos. We have to work together. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Great to meet you.